Welcome back to MicroVerse. In the previous lecture, we studied Koch postulates and understand how Robert Koch established a scientific method to prove that specific microorganism causes a specific disease. These four postulates become the foundation of medical microbiology and significantly strengthen the germ theory of disease. However, as a microbiology advanced, scientists made an interesting observation. Not every infectious disease follow Koch postulate perfectly. Does this mean Koch postulates are incorrect? Absolutely not. It simply means that biological systems are far more complex than scientists initially believed. Let's understand why Koch postulates are not always applicable. So, when Robert Koch proposed his postulates in the 19th century, microbiology was still in its early stage. At that time, scientists mainly studied bacterial diseases such as anthrax, tuberculosis, and cholera, where Koch criteria worked remarkably well. However, with the discovery of viruses, asymptomatic carriers, opportunistic pathogen, and host immune responses, researchers realized that some infections disease could not satisfy all four postulates. These limitations become evident as a microbiology expand beyond classical bacterial infections. Limitation 1. Some microorganism cannot be grown in pure culture. The second postulate requires that the microorganism be isolated and grown in pure culture. This works well for many bacteria but not every pathogen. For example, viruses are obligate intracellular parasites, so they cannot multiply on ordinary artificial culture media because they require living host cell. Similarly, Mycobacterium leprae, the bacterium responsible for leprosy, cannot be routinely grown in artificial laboratory media. Since this organism cannot fulfill the second postulates, it does not mean they are non-pathogenic. It simply reflects the limitations of these available culture methods. Limitation 2. Some disease occur only in humans. The third postulate requires introducing the microorganism into healthy susceptible host to reproduce the disease. Today, deliberately infecting healthy human volunteers with dangerous pathogens is ethically unacceptable. In addition, some pathogens infect only humans, making suitable experimental animal models unavailable. For example, Treponema pallidum, the causative agent of syphilis, and several human specific pathogens cannot always be studied using Koch's original experimental approach. Model research therefore relies on cell culture systems, animal models were appropriate, and methods instead of intentionally infecting healthy humans. Then the limitation 3. Healthy carriers can harbor pathogens. According to the first postulate, the pathogens should be present only in diseased individuals. However, microbiology has shown that some apparently healthy people can carry pathogens without developing symptoms. These individuals are known as asymptomatic carriers. One of the most famous historical example is Typhoid Mary, who carried Salmonella typhi and transmitted typhoid fever despite remaining clinically healthy. In fact, Robert Koch himself recognized this limitation after the discovery of asymptomatic carriers in diseases such as cholera and typhoid. Then the limitation 4. One disease may be caused by different microorganisms. Another limitation is that single clinical syndrome may have multiple microbial causes. So take pneumonia as an example. It may be caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Staphylococcus aureus, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, or even respiratory viruses. Although the symptoms are similar, the causative organism is not always the same. Therefore, the concept of one disease, one microorganism does not apply universally. So, from today's discussion, one important concept should be clear. Koch postulates were revolutionary because they introduced a scientific method for proving disease causation. However, microbiology has shown that living systems are more complex than originally believed. The limitations do not invalidate Koch's work, rather, they encourage scientists to develop more advanced methods for studying infectious diseases. That is how science progresses, by building upon strong foundations and refining them as new evidence emerges. So, if classical Koch postulates cannot explain every infectious disease, an obvious question arises: how do modern microbiologists establish disease causation today? The answer lies in molecular Koch postulate, which use molecular biology to identify the genes responsible for microbial virulence. So, in our next lecture, we will explore molecular Koch postulate and the modern modification of Koch's original concepts. Thank you for learning with MicroVerse. Keep learning, keep growing, and let's master microbiology, one concept at a time.